So, finally, now that we've gotten through what's happened in the movie, I want to start breaking down at least 3 of the characters who have a different kind of background, or at least origin story, when it comes to the comics. So, let's go to the comic origins. So let's start with our big bad, Johann Schmidt. Johann Schmidt was introduced in Captain America Comics #1 on March 1941. So obviously Schmidt was raised in Germany by Hermann Schmidt and Martha. Why did you say that name? That's another movie reference. So Schmidt's mother died giving birth to him, and come to find out, Hermann was an abusive husband, but somehow still loved his wife, and in that love decided to avenge her death by trying to drown Johann right after he was born. The doctor, seeing that the father was trying to drown Schmidt, saves him, and the father, being as sad as he was, decided to kill himself. So now Schmidt ends up an orphan. That beginning part wasn't a lot of fun to read. It's pretty disturbing how villains become villains in these comics. So during his time as an orphan, he escaped at 7. He became a beggar and a thief. Even spent some time in prison for vagrancy and theft. Now, when Schmidt was a teenager, he ended up working as a bellhop in a very popular hotel. And in this hotel, there happened to be Hitler. And in this time, this was the rise of the Third Reich. So Hitler meets Schmidt and decides to take him under his wing. So he makes him his protege, and after some time, he ends up realizing how amazing and smart Schmidt is. So he gives him a complete uniform and gives him a really grotesque mask that looks like a Red Skull, to later give him the name Red Skull. The Red Skull represented Nazis' intimidation and the fear that they should feel. And Hitler, of course, just was the face of the Nazis. If you're ever wondering if Schmidt's face ever turned out like it did in Captain America and not just a regular mask, yes it did. Turns out Schmidt had a personal weapon known as Dust of Death. Such a dark name. But this Dust of Death would spray into people's faces and discolor and disfigure them until they were a complete red skull, and they would die. The only difference is Schmidt was exposed to this gas, but instead of dying, he lived due to his exposure to the super soldier serum. So his face became permanently red skulled, hence the name Red Skull. So now on a lighter note, we move to our hero, Captain America. Captain America was also introduced in Captain America Comics #1 of the same year it was released. Steve's full name is Stephen Grant Rogers, and he was born on July 4th, 1922, because of course he was. He was raised by Sarah and Joseph Rogers, who both raised him during the Great Depression. Growing up, Steve's mom instilled in him this sense of duty, honor, and humility. And also, unfortunately, Steve's father died during World War I due to exposure to mustard gas. And on top of his dad, his mother got very, very ill and died of pneumonia while he was a teenager. So in school, Steve learned that Americans have the responsibility to protect and to care for the freedoms that other countries don't have. After Steve saw clips of Nazi soldiers attacking people, he decided to go enlist, but was rejected by a form that's known as the F4. Now, if you didn't know, that form means that he was unfit and unhealthy to perform military duties. So here's a quick fun fact that I found out. So Steve was born during the Great Depression, and on top of him being super skinny, he had a long list of diseases. Turns out, I did some research and find out that all the diseases that he had was also common diseases that people had during the Great Depression. So it kind of shows how they were historically able to create a character that shared the similarities to what happened in history. As far as the super soldier serum is concerned, Steve actually met Colonel Phillips first, who later introduced him to Dr. Eskrin, and then the movie was pretty accurate on what happened later on, which was Steve getting the serum, being exposed to the Vita rays, the serum being a success, and then Dr. Eskrin being assassinated afterwards. The only difference was, instead of parading around and punching a fake Hitler 1,000 times, Steve was actually trained in hand-to-hand combat, gymnastics, and even military strategy. But after he successfully became Captain America, Steve was actually subjected to a mind conditioning program, which made him believe he had a completely different life. He was conditioned to believe his name was Grant Rogers and that he had a brother who died in Pearl Harbor. He also was led to believe that he lived in an upper-class household, which guaranteed him He was also led to believe he lived in an upper-class family that was the cause of him being able to become a captain in the first place. Of course, Steve was later able to find out his true history and continue on as the Steve Rogers that we know now. So now we go to James Buchanan Barnes, formerly known as Bucky, who also again was introduced in Captain America Comics #1. It turns out the first time him and Steve actually met was in Camp Lee. After taking down Nazi commandos together, him and Steve decided to make their own Nazi fighting team. That Nazi fighting team consisted of some pretty powerful superheroes in that time period. One being Namor the Submariner and an android version of the Human Torch, which was interesting to find out. So their team was known as the Invaders, which oddly enough was a name given to them by Winston Churchill, which is pretty random, to be honest. Anyway, him and Bucky fought several battles for several years, but one of the differences is that Bucky didn't die in a train. Bucky actually died in a plane explosion. So him and Steve fought for several years in that team, but Bucky didn't die in a train. Turns out that Bucky actually died. No, the delivery was wrong. So him and Steve fought for so many years together, but him and Steve fought for several years together as the Invaders. So Steve and Bucky fought together in that team for several years, but Bucky didn't die falling out of a train. Turns out Bucky died after pursuing Baron Zemo, and the plane exploded, which is a much more graphic way for him to die. And to just finish it all off, we finish with Steve's love interest, Dr. Margaret Alexandra Carter. Our first introduction of her in the comics in a comic called Tales of Suspense #75 as a flashback memory of Steve's love interest. So unlike Steve, Bucky, and Schmidt, Peggy was actually raised in a very wealthy family in Richmond, Virginia in June 1920. She was also known as Virginia royalty. In her teen years, Peggy actually fell in love with a black man, but due to the racial climate, he decided to leave her and left her brokenhearted. Oddly enough, the night that she was broken up with, Peggy was actually recruited by the Daughters of Liberty, who is a sisterhood of guardians that protected knowledge of the new era. They were trained in combat and swordsmanship, which is pretty cool. Now, as a fully trained agent, Peggy heard about World War II and decided to leave to France to fight the war with them. She later joined the French Resistance to later have a code name under Agent 13. During that time, she was undercover in a cafe to where she met a young Steve Rogers. They ended up becoming very, very close, but it turns out the Daughters of Liberty actually ordered Peggy to get really, really close to Cap. But unfortunately, as fate would have it, Peggy actually fell really, really in love with him. She even joined the Invaders for a while until they had to be separated because their superiors had separate orders for them to be apart. Sadly, Peggy ended up being captured, tortured, and ended up with amnesia, but she was later saved by Steve. But since she had amnesia, she ended up wandering around and was eventually found by a family member who returned her back to Virginia. So the sad part about Peggy's story is that even in her amnesia, she would call out for Cap. Later, finding out that he died, she went into a catatonic state and decided to just wear black for the rest of her life. Oh, man, that was a lot of information. Jesus. But if you're still here, I hope you enjoyed learning about this stuff as much as I enjoyed looking it up. To be honest, I always knew the comics were dark, but they really dig into that trauma, don't they? But to be honest, I really do love this stuff. This stuff is so much fun to read. Again, I always knew this stuff was dark, but it was still interesting to find out how different things were from what happened in the movie. And to those who are still watching, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun to make. I may have been serious in some of those moments, but honestly, I was just trying to get all that information out to you guys. But it was fun, it was great, and I really enjoyed doing this. Thank you for anyone who's still watching this. I worked really, really hard to get this done. and get this out. And I promise I will continue to put in as much work as I need to for any other movies. Not just the MCU, but other franchises, other movies that people like, maybe movies I've never seen. And I promise I'm just going to continue to put in the hard work and bring out more videos. And even if they're movies I've never seen before, maybe you're a fan of the movie and it might make me a fan. I don't know what it's going to be, but whatever it is, lay it out on me. Put it in the comments, put it wherever, do whatever you need to do. Send me a message. I'll look it up, I'll watch it, I'll enjoy it, and I promise I'll talk about it as much as I need to. But again, guys, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to get alerts if I put out new videos. I promise I will watch anything that you put out for me to watch. And this has been fun. This has been a lot of fun, and I can't wait to come out with more stuff. So once again, guys, I'm Damien. This has been Filmsplaining, and I'll see you soon. Steve learned in school Americans have the responsibility to fight for the freedom that other countries didn't have. Nazi fighting team of several superheroes, one being Namor the Submariner? Submariner! Being Namor the Submariner. Namor the Submarine. Why can't I get it? But Bucky didn't die in a plane. What? So Bucky and Steve fought several years as that team, but years Peggy fell in love with a black man, but unfortunately due to the racial climate. What? I was in the zone, bro.
I'm sorry, it's 5 o'clock.
That's great. You also played the tambourine and did a bunch of stuff, and I'm hoping it's not a part of the sound. I'm almost done. I'm on Peggy, and then I'm done.